Hello and welcome again to What If Natives Won, a video blogging channel about alternate history in American Indians, Native Americans, indigenous peoples. This is the 15th video of 28 planned ones. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, genocide. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story collection, What If Natives Won. This is what this video blogging channel are about. There's a huge lack of alternate history written about American Indians, indigenous people. Many people don't like to think about genocides in America. They likely were never taught about them. Many don't want to be reminded, want to believe these genocides never happened, or that it was an accident. I've had great success using alternate history to teach my students, show them that absolutely nothing in history was inevitable. It never had to be. The worst of human history is always a conscious choice. How things turn out is based on how evil the evil choose to be, and how well and how strongly good people choose to stand up to them or stop them. The way things turn out in history took a very specific set of circumstances. Sometimes history can turn on very small things. Change even one and you have an entirely different history, different present, different society. It may be hard to hear this, but we live right now in a dystopian world, one of the worst of all possible outcomes for anyone who is not white. America is today 98% non-native. At least 75 million to 112 million natives were killed by not one genocide, but a series of them, the last of them ending only in the year 2000. In America, Brazil, Canada, Guatemala, Argentina, Mexico, Peru, and elsewhere. On top of that is massive genocide denial. This is not taught in almost all American schools. There are racist images everywhere that are not often admitted to be racist. But much of this could change if the Lewis and Clark expedition failed or disappeared. The U.S. only bought the claim to Louisiana territory from Napoleon. They did not buy the territory. Almost all of it was still controlled by dozens of native nations. The French only controlled New Orleans, Baton Rouge, the area around it, St. Louis, and some other trading posts. Jefferson and Congress both admitted they didn't even know most of what was in the land the U.S. claimed. So Jefferson sent a diplomatic and scientific expedition led by these two men. Lewis and Clark were unusual in that this was not an invasion or scouting for an invasion. The men did gather scientific evidence, plants, animals, and mapped. They also were not hostile. In fact, Lewis and Clark, like most other European and American Westerners, knew they carried diseases with them. They brought vaccines to inoculate natives, but sadly they were accidentally destroyed. Their mission was also diplomatic. They established contacts with over 24 tribal nations. After they returned, Jefferson also sent the Red River and Pike expeditions to the southern half of the Louisiana claim. The U.S. presence in Louisiana was tiny. Missouri had less than 16,000 colonists in 1810, most of them in St. Louis. Louisiana itself had under 80,000. Arkansas wouldn't be a territory for 16 years, a state for 30 years. Minnesota wouldn't be a territory for almost 40 years. And as late as the 1850s, large parts of it were still native homelands. Most of the people the U.S. claimed control over were natives, and the U.S. didn't even know who they were or where they were. If this expedition fails or disappears, invading American colonists will be reluctant, invade much slower. A failed expedition might convince many that the Louisiana Purchase was folly, much like what was said about the U.S. buying Alaska from Russia 60 years later. Both France and then Spain did not devote much attention to the territory, only trading, sending a few people into it, who were mostly trappers and missionaries. How could it have failed? The leaders themselves described the dangers. By chance, they had a guide in the teenage slave, Sacagawea. She was often their translator, but more importantly, her presence convinced native tribal nations this was not a hostile invasion. Without her, they could have been wiped out. They also could have become lost, gone hungry, died from disease. They also came very close to a Spanish attack. A complete disappearance would be more devastating than a failed return where they could make their case to the public. In Alaska's case, it was not even organized into a territory for over 40 years. The population didn't grow until its gold rush 30 years later. and the only gold rush in the West would not be for over 40 years in California, which is still part of Mexico. Only land bordering the Mississippi River, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, are likely to still become territories and then states. How long a delay is possible? From 5 to 40 years. What would even a 5-year delay in colonizing look like? 5 years, perhaps up to 40, of fewer or later deaths from wars, starvation, disease, and time to recover from earlier epidemics. If Americans are invading the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains only in the 1920s, compare that to native nations also fighting central governments in Latin America in the 1920s. There were very different cultural attitudes in 1850 or 1870 compared to 1920. By then, there were widespread beliefs in socialism, populism, anarchism, labor movements, and other ideas. Native peoples in Mexico played a central role in the Mexican Revolution. Imagine natives allied with anti-war movements during the Spanish-American War or World War I. This is the end of the 15th video. I look forward to your comments and questions and will answer them as often as I can. Racism, genocide denial, childish behavior, personal attacks get deleted. But I do recognize some questions will be asked in ignorance because much of the facts I point to are new to most people. They were never taught about this. They've been raised in denial since denying indigenous genocides is taught in almost all public schools. Next time we will discuss what if Tecumseh's alliance wins. Please repost freely, subscribe, like, share, and comment. I will post again in about a week. This has been What If Natives Won video blog and channel.